everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Divorce and Separation Coach podcast. This week, we're talking about divorcing after 50 and the hidden challenges of grey divorce. So, in today's episode, we're going to be exploring the rising trend of couples over 50 choosing to separate. In the past 3 decades, the divorce rate for this age group has doubled, and those for over 65 has tripled. So we'll look at why long-term marriages are ending later in life. And to discuss this, I've invited Andrew Hatherley. Andrew is the founder and CEO of Wiser Divorce Solutions and Transcend Retirement, and he's the host of the Great Divorce podcast. After going through his own midlife divorce, Andrew decided to help others avoid the financial and emotional stress so common to the process. He earned the designation of Certified Divorce Financial Analyst and founded Wiser Divorce Solutions to help individuals and couples before and during divorce. Andrew, it's great to have you. Thank you for joining us.
I'm very happy to be here, Chloe.
It's so interesting. It's such an interesting topic because I've noticed even in my client base a real shift and an increase in later life divorce. Do you
Yes.
have any theories as to why there is this kind of phenomenon going on?
It seems every day I've got a new theory. I'm up to about eight
Oh,
reasons for
wow.
why this is happening. I think basically there's an increased acceptance of divorce in society, and the baby boomer generation, who you mentioned, who are seeing 3 times the rate of divorce compared to 30, 40 years ago. They bring with them an acceptance of divorce, and they're bringing the divorce train with them in their later years. So there's that, and then of course the aging of the population as people get older and face the prospect of perhaps living for another 20 or 30 years. If you've reached 60, 65, there's a good chance you're going to make to 85 or 90. And many people start to think, okay, well, maybe I don't necessarily want to wake up next to this person every day for the next 20 years. So longevity is certainly factoring into it's like, do it now, follow my dreams now,
Yeah.
be happy now, rather than just continue with inertia for the next 20 years. I think a key component of the difference, certainly over the last 30, 40 years to previously, was the economic power of women. They don't
Hmm.
need to stay. So many women don't need to stay in marriages
Yeah.
anymore for economic reasons. The participation of women in the labor force has grown to such an extent that they can be perfectly independent by themselves, and so that impediment to stepping out on their own, is no longer there.
Yeah.
Uh, there I consider, as people get older, you've heard about the empty nest syndrome where the
Of
where the
course.
kids leave
Yeah.
home. There's another syndrome I like to call the crowded house syndrome. And that's when one spouse retires, and
Yeah.
typically it's the male, and they're
Yeah.
hanging around the house all day, and
And suddenly they're spending a lot more time together and not necessarily enjoying
they're
it.
spending a lot more time together, and familiarity is breeding contempt. And
Yeah.
so this I'm seeing is uh, anecdotally a cause for divorce.
Yeah.
And another thing is, I mentioned economic power of women and greater independence. Well, that's just fueled by the personal development industry. You
Yeah.
think 25, 30 years ago, you had Anthony Robbins and maybe Dr. Phil, and now it seems that personal development gurus are a dime a dozen. Mel
Yeah.
Robbins, Brene Brown, Simon Sinek. The self-development stacks at the bookstores are filled, which is a
Yeah.
good thing. It's encouraging people to be the best versions of themselves. So
Mhm.
this is encouraging people, particularly, as I say, later in life when the clock is ticking, and so this can encourage people to move on with their lives in a different direction as well. I recently did a podcast about the effect of politics.
Oh,
Become the politics on gray divorce. I don't
yeah.
know this is a huge cause, but certainly the polarized politics that we're seeing, definitely in the United States, and I know from reading the news, you see it overseas as well, um, just causing people to have more and more disagreements about this subject,
Mhm.
and
And it
friendships have
breaks up
broken up.
marriages.
I'm sure it can break up marriages
Yeah,
as
yeah,
well. Now, one issue that I keep hearing more about, and I've been unable to secure a guest to discuss it with me on the Great Divorce podcast. I hope it's not because I'm a man. I like to think I'm a pretty open-minded man.
yes,
Is the issue of menopause and perimenopause, which of
yes,
course happen, the 45 to 50 and 50 up kind of time period,
yeah.
and the effect that that can have
It is
on
definitely a factor. I think that there's quite a bit of research that shows that midlife, and in particular the hormonal changes that happen with women, but also with men, they contribute to that sense of not being understood by the other person, feeling isolated, unsupported, and all of that fuels whatever, pre-existing cracks might have been in the marriage. And so it's very common for people who are going through those phases to think that actually, to attribute the downfall of their relationships to those changes.
Yeah, I think it's something that more research is coming out on this, and it's
Mhm.
something I'd like to discuss more, or research more, and speak to experts
It's
about.
fascinating. So from your work on the ground, working with a lot of people going through gray divorce, do you find that those divorces are different in any way than a younger divorce? Are there any trends that are different, an approach to divorce that's different?
Well, a couple of the key differences between the Great Divorce and somebody younger in life. Older people tend not to have minor children, so
True.
the issue of minor children is not prevalent. Now, the impact of gray divorce in adult children is
Mhm.
once again an under-recognized phenomenon. And
I agree.
funnily enough, the podcast of mine that's had the most downloads was
Hmm.
one I did with Dr. Carol Hughes, where we discussed the impact of gray divorce on adult children. It's quite fascinating. But as a certified divorce financial analyst, I'm dealing with people, trying to recover financially after
Yeah.
divorce. And with gray divorcees, you don't have as much time. If you're getting divorced at 30 or 40, you're probably not yet in your prime earning years. You're just starting to accumulate funds for retirement. But if you're getting divorced at 60, 65, chances are you're either in retirement or very close to it.
Yeah.
And this financial earthquake is happening, which can be the largest financial transaction in your life, where essentially your net worth is being cut in half.
Hmm.
How do you recover from that?
Yeah.
And typically older people do have larger retirement plans. They may have
Yeah.
pensions. They usually have more equity in their homes. So
Yeah.
there are some creative solutions that can be put to work, but it's very important to get these settlements right, not to give,
Yes.
the tax man a bonus on your separation, to divide your assets in a manner that's tax efficient
Yeah.
and in a manner that puts you on a solid financial foundation for the rest of your life. But often there's some emotional fallout, and sometimes more emotional fallout, because you've been with a person for 25 or 30 years, and it's a complete life change. It's
Yeah.
and your attitudes towards, once again, financially, towards retirement may have to require some adjustment. You may have
Yeah.
to work longer. You may have to go back into the labor force. Or one thing I encourage people to do is to kind of refocus how they think about money and how they think about their retirement goals. Because
Yeah.
quite often people think, okay, well, I'm going to, and the financial services industry perpetuates this manner of thinking, is that
Hmm.
I need $2 million to retire, and I need to be able to spend 150, $200,000 a year, and I need to have 3 vacations overseas, and I need to drive this type of car. Well, I'm sure you know that many studies have been done that have shown that these are not the type of things that bring happiness and
For sure.
contentment. Um, and in the divorce world, I've seen some very wealthy people who are not particularly happy. What brings happiness ultimately is our relationships with other people, family,
Yeah.
friends, colleagues, and having some sort of meaningful reason to get up in the morning. These are the important things. And so quite often there's a psychological adjustment that needs to take place in the older divorcing person because they've been brought up or they've been trained to think about retirement in a certain way.
Yeah,
And that requires some rethinking. And I had to do that myself. I mean, that's why I focused my investment advisory practice on helping people who've recently emerged from late life divorce, and my
hmm,
divorce consulting practice focuses works with people before and during divorce, and seeks to help them. I like to help people learn from what I've gone through and
of course, that's the
the
point.
positive experiences, and because when you're going through divorce and late life divorce, particularly, you think the worst is going to happen and your imagination runs wild and the emotions take over and there can be sadness, anger, bitterness, resentment. It's very rare that the worst happens, but it
Yes.
requires some work on our part to set ourselves up for both financially and emotionally for a new life after divorce.
And it's true that, with the change in the way people approach work and career and much more of a gig economy kind of approach that we have nowadays, it's not quite as binary as it used to be. If, either you're working or you're retired and sitting in your chair all day. There's a lot of people who keep some activity, who still have a stream of income, maybe less than before, but
Yeah.
that idea that your pension needs to be 100%, added up and ready to go by the time you retire isn't necessarily true anymore.
Right. Well, of course, as a financial advisor, I know that not nearly as many people have pensions anymore, particularly
Yes, that's true.
in the United States. So, it's the onus is on them to save while they're working. And but as you said, technology, the fact that we're doing this call on Zoom, I do so many of my client meetings. I work
Yeah.
with people all across the country, and we meet via Zoom. And I'm 62 myself, and at one point I thought I'd be retired at 62, but now I'm
Mhm.
thinking, I've been doing the podcast for 3 years, and I just see that more and more people are listening to it and calling me for help, and I just hired another person. And I'm thinking, well, okay, I can't exactly retire. This
And you may not want to either.
Well, that's just it. That's just it. When
Yeah.
you find yourself doing something that is having a positive effect and helping people, um, I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm not going to stop doing this podcast. So
Mhm.
what? But I need people to help me, and
Yeah.
perhaps somewhere down the road, well, definitely somewhere down the road, I'm going to lighten my load a little bit, but it's not going to stop me from if I want to do pick and choose which cases I work on or continue to do the podcast,
Mhm.
consult, whatever. I can still do that. So
Yeah.
not anytime soon. I'm enjoying what I'm doing, but certainly
No, but it's true
it
that that model is shifting of
is.
what retirement looks like. I do have a few clients who are in later life, and what's interesting is it's a very different conversation to with younger couples, because usually with younger couples, the biggest asset is the family home. But now I'm seeing cases where actually the pensions far outweigh the family home. Nobody gives a hoot
Right.
actually about the family home in these conversations. It's very much about the pensions because they take on so much more importance at that stage in life. And as you say, the opportunity to make more money and to accumulate more wealth, it's a much shorter window to do that.
It is. It's such a, as I said, it's likely the largest financial transaction in one's life. And I think it's important, we're both members of the Amicable Divorce Network.
Yeah.
And I love it when people find me before they've found an attorney because I can direct them to a process if it sounds like they're amenable
Mhm.
to a more conflict-free process like mediation or amicable divorce. There's also collaborative divorce. There's different types of processes which can be a lot less stressful both financially and emotionally. And so,
Yeah.
there's always going to be cases where litigation is necessary and the tough kind of pit bull attorney might be necessary. But I think the vast majority of cases that's not the case.
I agree.
And people are vulnerable when they go through divorce because they don't understand the process. I'm a financial advisor, and I was humbled by how little I knew about the financial aspects of divorce when I was going through it. I thought, well, that's enough of that. I'm going to dedicate my work now to helping people understand from the outset, to educate people from the outset, because you don't want to be taking divorce advice from your drinking buddies or your tennis girlfriends
Yeah,
or whatever. You need to get advice in the right place. And this is another way technology has been a boon, is that there are so many good podcasts out there,
for
blogs,
sure.
lots of good information. So certainly recommend people get educated as much as possible. It's knowledge is
And
certainly power.
you actually were touching on something that's interesting, which is the amicable approach. And I've noticed that couples in later life, maybe because the logic of the divorce is, I want to enjoy what time I've got left, and I don't want to spend it with this person. I find them much less likely to get entrenched and caught in kind of a legal quagmire that you might see in other cases. They tend to be, as you said, there's no younger children at play, so that always helps.
Yeah.
But they tend to be more resolution focused, and there's more of an attitude of let's get this done, let's get this done without it taking over our lives, and so we can move on. And so, in that sense, there's more collaboration in those processes.
I'm seeing a lot more. Yes, Chloe, I'm seeing a lot more over the course of the last few years.
Hmm.
People coming to me aware of mediation or amicable divorce or collaborative divorce or other processes.
Yeah,
And I think to a certain extent, age doesn't always bring wisdom, but sometimes it does. And I
sometimes it
think it's
does.
I think it's very wise not to get stuck in a legal process that can go on months just out of bitterness or spite.
Yeah,
I think I'm seeing, and I think because of the education available, we recently put out a very large the Divorce Amicably book, Your Roadmap
yeah,
to Resolution, more than 400 pages, um, about 80 chapters on various divorce topics. Resources like this are increasingly available to people, and they're understanding that this doesn't have to be like the old War of the Roses or L.A.
exactly.
Law or and the typical stereotypical divorce fights. I mean, I think, and maybe a lot of people don't know this, but even a divorce where it starts out as a litigated divorce, people hire their attorneys. 95% of the time, it ends up settling, and
Exactly.
it ends up settling usually because in the States there's a calendar, and
Hmm.
so you file for divorce, and they say, okay, well, if this isn't settled by 9, 10 months in the future, a year, whatever, then we're going to trial.
Hmm.
And so that calendar, the the time, people get worn out. They get worn out financially by paying heavy retainers to attorneys every month. They get worn out emotionally discussing these same issues over and over. So 9.5 times out of 10, they end up settling anyway. But unfortunately, they've usually written, in many cases, tens of thousands of dollars
Yeah.
in checks to attorneys over that time.
And oftentimes they come to an agreement that they could have reached at the beginning, but
Exactly.
there is a process
Exactly.
that happens there.
Exactly.
So you touched a little bit on the impact on children, and that was one of the things I wanted us to discuss because I think there's this misconception that if your children have flown the nest, it's not going to affect them. And actually, there's studies that show that it almost affects them more because,
Mm.
in a lot of ways, it kind of destroys the reality they grew up in, and they are not privy to the new arguments and the new dynamics. And so they may be very surprised. What has been your experience on that front?
Definitely. I would argue that it probably does affect them the more. I mean, I was just thinking about the holidays that are coming up.
Mhm.
And when I was a kid, my main concern is like what's going to be under the tree Saturday,
Of
Saturday
course.
morning. But if you're an adult dealing with divorcing parents, there are issues like whose house are we going to eat at? Who's going to cook this time? Is mom going to bring her new boyfriend?
Mhm.
These issues don't resonate with an 8-year-old.
Yeah,
I mean, they do to a certain extent. I don't mean
much
to
less. Yeah.
downplay the impact on younger children, but I think what happens is with older children, like adult children, what happens in divorce is that a couple will meet with or a person divorcing will meet with an attorney, and one of the first questions I'll ask are, "Do you have any minor children?" And in my particular case, I answered no, and they're
Yeah.
like, "Okay, move
Okay,
right
good.
along.
No, nothing to
We're
discuss.
good.
Yeah.
We're good." Well, yeah, the attorney doesn't is good because he doesn't have any work to do there. But from an emotional standpoint and a relationship standpoint, which is why it's so important to have therapists and coaches in the divorce process working with you. For adult children, consider that a minor spends the period from birth to 18. An adult child can be from 18 to 65 or
Yeah.
more.
Yeah.
So many different life phases that they potential that they can go through. They can be, just heading to college. They could be middle age with a family of their own, or they could
Yeah.
even be approaching because some people are getting divorced in their 80s. They
Yeah.
could even be approaching retirement and be an adult child
Yeah.
of divorce.
Yeah.
So there's
Absolutely.
so many different ways that the dynamic can affect an adult child, and one that particularly, I mean, consider the issue of when the parents are married. It's one would assume that caregiving of the dad would be taken care of by mom or vice versa. Well, what happens when they split up? All of a
Yeah.
sudden, that potentially falls on the adult children.
Yeah.
The emotional impact of, let's say you're in your 40s and your parents in their 60s or 70s are getting divorced, and you're in a relationship that's being tested by whatever. You're thinking, my God, if my parents can't make it, what are the chances of, that I'm going to make it here?
Yeah.
So there's those type of issues. Then I mentioned the holidays and the changing dynamics of family traditions and
Yeah.
roles, dealing with your parents' new significant others. There's a whole slew of issues related to adult children of divorce, which is
Yeah.
probably the fact that not many people are aware of this or enlightened about this. Probably why that podcast episode I did with Dr. Carol Hughes on the impact of divorce on adult children has resonated with so many people.
Yeah.
It's
I'm
not
sure.
really appreciated.
Well, it's actually, I have a chapter in my book which is about telling your children about the divorce. And there's a
Mm,
section about speaking to adult children. And I think that's something that, again, is mishandled because we think, well, they're grown-ups, they're mature. But in this relationship, they're still the child. And so there's a lot of impact from that perspective and pulling them back into that childish role. And the other thing I've noticed, and this is anecdotal, but based on the cases I've worked on where there were divorces in later life, I've noticed a strong alignment of the children with one of the parents. A lot of cases
mm.
where the children stop speaking to the other parent or the one that's considered faulty for whatever reason. And I
That's
think
yeah.
because they somehow have a stronger opinion than they do, or maybe they're less sheltered from having an opinion than a younger child is. Have you noticed that too?
Definitely. And I think more often than not, the maternal bonds tend to hold,
Yeah, that's true.
and that this could be for a variety of reasons, but I think maternal bonds is certainly a prime biological impetus. Maybe dad misbehaved, whatever, but the this can have a tremendous impact on the social impact, which men tend to feel a little more after divorce for a variety of reasons. But if they find themselves more often than not estranged from their adult children, um, out of the loop in terms of social gatherings. Um, Many older men are conditioned by the way they're brought up that their wife is a social coordinator.
Yeah,
It's a,
and they don't
and it's
know how
like,
to do all that. Yeah.
yeah, they don't know how to do that, and it sounds strange to some people, but the social coordinator is the one who reaches out and sets dinner dates with
Yeah.
other people. We're
I
getting
see it with
together
my
with the
parents. My father wouldn't know how to organize any of that.
Exactly. So that is an issue that affects men, particularly
Mhm.
older men in divorce. The issues of loneliness, isolation, and which is why we've seen. I mean, there's research out there. There should be more research about incidences of suicide, addictions on older men going through divorce. Now, these things happen to women too, but they tend to tilt larger towards men. Women
Yeah,
tend to women tend to feel more the economic impact
yeah.
of late life divorce.
That's a very interesting point, actually. I was thinking as well, I guess inheritance must become a factor here. Planning. I would imagine when people are getting divorced later in life, there's more of a concern about how is that going to affect my children because they're getting closer to an age where they might inherit. How do you take that into account in their settlements?
Well, ultimately, they'll have each parent will have half the amount uh, to well they'll have the assets will be split,
Yeah,
and ultimately more of those assets, a greater percentage of assets are going to have to go towards creating a solo life for that person. So potentially, likely, the inheritance will drop
yeah,
the expected amount that children might receive likely go down as funds are needed to support the new households.
exactly. And potentially
But
more help, like stay-at-home help if they're ill, where the other parent would have usually, been the one being the caregiver, that kind of thing.
exactly. But one important thing that I need to mention with respect to inheritance, and that a lot of people going through divorce, they get divorced, and they're like, "Oh, I'm relieved. Thank goodness that's over." Well, they forget to do a number of important things, and this is one of
Hmm.
the things I work with my clients on. Is like, have you changed the beneficiaries on your retirement plans? Have you changed the
Yes.
beneficiaries on your insurance policies? It's a nightmare when, let's say, dad forgets to change his beneficiary, um, and he's remarried. Perhaps the new wife doesn't get anything, or maybe he wants his kids to be beneficiaries
Yeah.
of life insurance, but he doesn't change it. Now maybe he goes to the ex-wife, but maybe she's in a new relationship and is leaving it
Yeah.
to her new husband and not the
Hmm.
kids. So you've got to be really vigilant about changing those beneficiary designations,
Yeah.
particularly on plans like in the United States we have 401k plans, which
Hmm.
are called ERISA plans.
Hmm.
If you don't change the beneficiary at the plan, that plan will still go to whoever's named on it,
Yeah.
despite what
Yeah.
the marital
They
settlement
don't care
agreement
if you're
says.
divorced or not. Yeah.
Right.
But
So it's very important, in terms of inheritance to update the beneficiaries and get your wills and trusts updated as
yes.
well after the divorce.
And powers of attorney. And
Hmm.
I often see women also worry because men can have children so much later in life that, if the husband ends up remarrying or even just having another child, that's going to negatively impact their own children. And so trying to include in the settlements clauses that protect the children from that first marriage. Is that something that you see a lot?
Not particularly. I think people are more focused on making sure that what they come out of with the marriage will get them through the next
Well,
20
yes, that's an
or
obvious
30 years.
concern.
That
Yes.
seems to be where a big concern is. Um, but when I work with people, after the divorce, we make sure that that what is left will go to their children if they wanted to. I mean,
Of
some
course.
people would prefer to leave it to charity and say, my kids have plenty of money. And in older life, and for older divorces, if people are getting divorced 65, 70,
Yeah.
I mean, typically, in many cases, their children are in their 40s or 50s and are doing perfectly fine for
They could be
themselves.
doing very well at that stage, absolutely.
Yeah, mom and dad may be coming to them for some money.
So thank you so much, Andrew. So many interesting topics. My head is buzzing with questions, but I'm aware of time, and I would like to end the podcast by asking you for your top three tips for someone going through gray divorce. What should they be aware of?
I think the number one thing is to educate yourself about the process. Now, depending on what state you live in, there are going to be different ways that your state treats things like spousal support and alimony, for instance. So before you run out and hire an attorney, get
Yeah,
educated about the process, and consider that divorce is a legal process, but it's really about money. And emotions factor into it so much. So my second key takeaway was consider that, yes, it's not a good idea to do it yourself in divorce, particularly if there's any type of assets involved,
Yeah.
but you also need help on the emotional front and the financial front.
Mhm.
And it could actually be less costly. It sounds like something costly to build a divorce team. Well, no, it isn't, because if your divorce attorney is doing all this work at $400 or $500 an hour, or more in some cases, have them delegate it, provided that they're a team approach attorney,
Yes, of course.
which you want to make sure of as well. Have them delegate the financial work to a financial advisor, such as myself, who's half the rate,
Yeah.
225, 250 an hour, or therapists are typically even less expensive than that. So you can build a divorce team, and it's not going to cost you an awful lot of money.
I agree.
And I would say, thirdly, you know, don't let your imagination run away with you. People always often think this is going to be the worst thing ever. I'm going to be working until I'm 85, and in some cases, work until you're 85 might actually be a good thing, but
Yeah.
not if you hate your job. But that's what people think. They think I'm going to have to pay spousal support for the rest of my
Yeah.
life. But that typically doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So I would say the more you get educated, the more you realize that the worst rarely happens, and that it's a
Yes.
tremendous opportunity for you to hit the reset button on your life. Chances are, if you're going through divorce, things weren't working out. And so, okay, it's time to hit the reset button, time to embark on a new adventure. And I know it's not always easy to do this, but the more educated you are, the better the professionals you're working with, the easier, the less stressful, let's say, the less stressful both emotionally and financially the process will be.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think you've got a really good point around education. A lot of the fear about divorce is the uncertainty. And if you start to understand what your rights are, how you're protected by the law, and what a traditional outcome looks like, in a lot of cases, a lot less bad than what people start imagining as their worst case scenario. So
Yeah.
gathering that information, I mean, it means you have your eyes wide open when you're entering the process effectively.
Always better to be prepared,
Yeah.
understand what's going on for sure.
Thank you so much, Andrew. So many good tips. How can people find you if they need your help?
People can find me at my website, transcendretirement.net. They can always email me at andrew@wiserdivorcesolutions.com. And they can find me at all their favorite podcast spots, The Gray, Gray, The
Yeah.
Gray Divorce Podcast.
And I've listened to that podcast. I've been on that podcast. It's a
Yes, you
brilliant,
have.
brilliant resource for people. So I definitely encourage people to explore that. Thanks so much, Andrew. You have a lovely day.
Thank you very much, Chloe. It's been a pleasure.